So with small companies, with startups, one of the concepts that's really quite common and popular here is the concept of pivot. In fact, sometimes the concept of pivot, you know when we go through buzzword bingo? You know, you hear pivot 5 times, you go bingo, right? And there's a few more in there. Disruption, we use disruption a lot, there's another one. But pivot is one of those that is a great expression. It was coined here. And we say, okay, so when you fail, sometimes failure says it's time to make a big change. Who here uses the mobile application Bourbon? Nobody. Who here drinks bourbon? Yeah. All right, it's a Cal Berkeley crowd. So bourbon, and bourbon doesn't exist anymore, so there's a reason why you're not using it. Bourbon was funded by Andreessen Horowitz with some young entrepreneurs, and it was a combination of many different features. It was a mobile application that had some game elements to it, because they liked gaming. It had location-based elements to it. You could check in like you could with Foursquare. It had some e-commerce applications to it. Had a lot of different elements. And it also had a great little camera function as well, photo function. And as the founders of Bourbon, after having worked on this for 2 years, got ready to take it out to market, they spent time and they went back to their beta users, several hundred beta users, and they said, well, what do you think about our baby? And the user said, it sucks. It's too complicated, we don't know when to use it, we're not sure how the pieces all fit together, we really don't like it very much, but we do love this little photo app that you have on the side. And they heard that again and again. So what they did, at first they thought we failed. Then they said, wait a minute, there's, in the ashes of this failure is this great little product called Instagram. And they took the whole engine that they'd been working, they scrapped 90% of the features, and they focused on that one feature, Instagram. And they launched that product less than 2 months later. And we know what happened. This is a company that, with less than 2 dozen, I think there were 13 employees at the time, was bought by Facebook for over $1 billion. 13 employees, $1 billion, all by actually finding that nugget inside of a failure. Now, sometimes, instead of pivoting, maybe it makes more sense to say, we're working on something, let's rivet. John?
And there's a mid-sized company, a category that we call growing ups. By the way, this is where most of the economy of the United States and most of the economies around the world depend on these medium-sized, small and medium-sized companies. And I'll give you one example here, but I want to start with a question. How many of you, if I were to visit your garage or your kitchen cabinet or your utility closet, have this product? Yeah, I thought so. Really? You have that product? I think you might have this product, right? So what's the connection between WD-39 and WD-40? It's an example not of pivoting, but of riveting. Of a team that basically, from the Rocket Chemical Company in 1953, had an original idea to create a proprietary, world-changing water displacement formula. And the team of scientists who focused on that job had the confidence, had the tenacity, to basically stay with that original vision through WD-1, 2, 3, 39, and by the time they got to 40, they figured it out. And the formula fundamentally hasn't changed in all those years. So don't just think about encountering failure and pivoting away from the failure. Sometimes it's digging in to the failure. It's digging in and sticking with things if you have that particular kind of confidence in what it is you're trying to do, whether you're a startup or a mid-sized organization. So we had a chance to talk to a number of CEOs, major players in worldwide commerce. And we wanted to get their insights on this other F word, how they deal with it. I'll share just one small vignette about Mark Hoplamassian at Hyatt. Mark has a phrase that he likes, and it goes like this: version 0.5 beats version 1.0. And what he's trying to do at Hyatt is to lower the threshold before people around that organization take the first step in trying out an idea of theirs. Up until that point, you can imagine the situation, right? People have ideas for new improvements, they have ideas for innovations, they want to try something new in the market, and it would go through the phalanx of committees and processes and formats and templates and different kinds of stage gating reviews and the like. And what happened more often than not was that some very good ideas and the energy behind them began to get stultified. So not enough efforts were happening. So Mark came up with this idea, borrowed from the software industry, and he said, look, I'd rather have more people trying things at an earlier stage and learning from those efforts, those experiments, than I would waiting on the assumption that we know, in all cases, what's really going to work and what's not going to work. So even in these large organizations struggling with the difficulties of scale, they're trying to figure out how to create a more failure-savvy culture through personal example, through a number of systems, and changing the metrics of these large organizations. And we ended up identifying something that we've called the failure value cycle. And then the question became, well, okay, we like the idea of cycles. We like the idea of extracting value out of failure. We need something that people can remember. And we went through a number of different ways of doing that, acronyms and mnemonics and all kinds of things. Then we said, no, wait a second, wait, let's learn from the pirates. Let's put every stage in this failure value cycle, let's start every stage with an R. So with apologies to any pirates in the audience, let me just quickly flag these. So this is a 7-stage failure value cycle. It starts fundamentally with respect. Because if you don't respect the very inevitability and universality of failure that we saw when we asked you to share your own experiences with one another, you're starting behind the 8 ball. You really are not yet prepared to understand what a gift failure can be. One of the things we like to say is that reality is failure. Failure is reality's way of telling you what you don't now know and what you do need to know. So starting this off with respect is an important first stage. Then we think the issue is one of rehearse. What we realized when we begin to think about this from the lens of failure is that ask yourself in your own business, what's more likely? The fire drill, earthquake, or maybe even terrorist attack that your organization might encounter? Or the kinds of failures that we talked about in the statistics earlier? The new product that's going to fail, the new hire that's not going to work out, the team that's not going to work out, the ad campaign that's going to bomb, the merger or acquisition that doesn't work. Those are the far more likely failures. But more often than not, what we see in organizations when they deal with those relatively predictable failures is that they're very ill prepared for it. They don't quite know how to deal with it, even though they happen over and over again. So we think this stage of rehearse is a very important one as well. Recognize is about how do you extend the perimeter of your business to have an earlier sense of when the symptoms or signals of failure are happening. Fourth, sooner or later, failure is going to happen. How do you deal with it? And we'll give you a couple of examples of how people have done it well and how not so well. After it's over, the issue is, what do you think about it? How do you reflect deeply, honestly, candidly, openly about not just who was involved, which is what many of us instinctively react to. One of the things, by the way, that Chad Holliday shared with us is one of the things he has trouble with on boards, corporate boards, is when things happen, particularly for publicly held companies, some of the first reactions are, who do we blame, who do we need to fire? And he said, that's not the question to ask. So that's part of turning this issue of what kinds of questions you ask and what sequence around when you get to the issue of the reflect stage. Sooner or later, you have to get back in the game. That's our rebound stage. And finally, one that we think most organizations flunk in this failure context is to remember the entire experience, from the early indicators that failure was happening to how you prepare for it, how you deal with it, what you learn from it, and how you can use that as a way to instill a stronger, more failure-wise culture going forward.